Good evening. My name is Daniela Dezeu. My background is as a doctor, but I'm currently working as a researcher for the Scottish Council on Human Bioethics. Right, before we look at the details of the latest bill, I figured it was worth just casting our eyes back over recent history, because since the Scottish devolution from Westminster, there have actually been 4 attempts to legalise assisted suicide. So the first was back in 2005 when Jeremy Purvis submitted a Right to Die bill. And this one's usually forgotten about because it failed so early on, but it did set the stage for what's to come. Because just a few years later, Margo MacDonald's End of Life Assistance Bill was brought before Parliament, and it sought to legalise both assisted suicide and euthanasia. It was defeated at stage 1 by a large majority. But not one to give up so easily, she reintroduced a revised bill in 2012, and this one focused solely on assisted suicide, and it also introduced some more detailed safeguards. But still, it was rejected at stage 1. Now, in 2021, Liam MacArthur announced that he was developing a new bill, and that's the Assisted Dying for Terminally Ill Adults Bill, and that's the one that we're going to look at just now. So after a long period of consultation and development, this bill was formally introduced to the Scottish Parliament in March 2024, and it would allow terminally ill patients to request drugs to end their life. So the drugs needed to be self-administered under the supervision of a healthcare professional. So the bill originally proposed that individuals must have an advanced and progressive illness, although this was later amended to having less than 6 months to live. Other eligibility criteria included being age 16 or over, but that was later amended to age 18, being resident in Scotland for at least 12 months and registered with a Scottish GP. So 2 independent doctors must confirm the diagnosis and declare that the patient has capacity and that there are no signs of coercion. And other safeguards as well included a 2-week reflection period and mandatory discussion about palliative care options. So the first vote, which was on the general principles of the bill, it was held a year later, and it passed with a significant margin. 70 MSPs voted for and 56 against. So after that, it was passed to the Health, Social Care and Sports Committee. And over the course of 4 meetings, this largely pro-bill committee rushed through a total of 298 amendments, and they agreed to only 74. So there are many safeguards which were dismissed at this stage, such as the doctor not being allowed to raise the option of assisted dying, of hospices being exempted, and of ensuring that the patient has full access to palliative and social care. But still, despite this, the bill comfortably passed its stage 2 vote, which meant it then entered stage 3, which brought it back to Parliament. And at this stage, over 300 amendments were debated, which is a lot for stage 3. Of those, 175 were passed, including the addition of the prognostic requirement of 6 months or less to live. And another significant change was the removal of Section 18, which would have allowed healthcare professionals with a conscientious objection to opt out. And it was found that this issue was outside of the competence of the Scottish Parliament. And so it would have to be agreed with Westminster after the bill had passed, which obviously raised some concerns. So the final vote was last month on the evening of the 17th of March. There were many personal and emotional stories shared, but there was also repeated mention of coercion and the risks for vulnerable people. And as the evening went on, it started to become clear that there were a number of MSPs who were planning to switch their vote. But when the results did come in, there was all-round surprise at just how decisively the bill was defeated. So 69 MSPs voted against, which meant that there were 12 who voted for at stage 1 had actually switched their vote. So it was still very close. So looking back at previous bills, we can say that this bill was a lot more tight. It was more structure and a detail on eligibility and the roles of health professionals. And the one thing that I really noticed was that it really aimed to place assisted dying right in the middle of healthcare, so promoting as a valid and reasonable treatment. And this is in line with some of the wider cultural changes that we've been seeing in healthcare for a long time. So even in the time since I qualified, there's been increasing emphasis on autonomy and choice and a sense of control, which assisted dying, of course, taps right into. And I think this is why self-administration was such a strong element of the bill. It creates this image of patients having control and at the same time offers doctors kind of this moral distance from the act of killing. So another point that's been repeatedly raised by opponents of the bill is the switch in language. Assisted suicide is now assisted dying, which removes the violent and tragic connotations of suicide. So language is definitely being used as a powerful tool to shape public perceptions. So why did it then end up failing? So most bails in Scotland, if they're accepted at stage 1, will go through, but this one fell at the last hurdle. So we think that this is probably due to a combination of factors, some of which are unique to the Scottish context, but most are relevant everywhere. So in terms of the Scottish context, the bill took a long time to go through Parliament. And generally it's the case that the more time there is to think, the deeper issues become clear. So the Scottish system gave the MSPs this time. We can also look back at stage 2 and question whether the committee did themselves a disservice by rushing through a rather weak bill. And it probably also helped that the leaders of the 3 main parties were openly against the bill, but perhaps even more significant than that was the fact that many MSPs were leaving after this session, which meant that they might have been able to vote more freely. As for the arguments which defeated the bill, the word that kept coming up in the final debate was coercion. So coercion was presented from different angles. Some MSPs talked about coercion from individuals, so as in cases of domestic and elder abuse and exploitation. Others talked about coercion from society as a whole, so from negative attitudes towards dependency, which many patients internalize. And there was lots of concern about coercion through circumstance, such as poverty and lack of social care. Pam Duncan-Glancy argued that it is inconceivable to suggest that the introduction of assisted dying is about choice when disabled people do not have choices in life. In a world where so many have little or no choice, we cannot risk making death the only choice that they ever have. Brian Whittle also stated that assisted dying cannot be seen in isolation. It must be a real choice. It must be a choice that includes appropriate palliative care, social care, and medical care. Without those elements of care, it is no choice at all. So ironically, what happened is that the emphasis on autonomy and choice, the arguments that are generally used by proponents of assisted dying, ended up undermining the bill. And the second big argument that came up was the removal of the employment protections for healthcare professionals. So without this conscientious objection clause, the Royal College of Psychiatrists, the British Geriatric Society, and pharmacists all came out as opposing the bill in the final days before the vote. And that also, I think, helped sway several MSPs. So what's next for Scotland? Already some politicians have stated that they hope assisted dying comes back in the next Parliament. With a big turnover of ministers, there is a lot of uncertainty, but we can, I think, take courage from the fact that although Holyrood has been described as one of the world's most socially progressive legislators, the bill still failed. And the reason for its defeat are relevant throughout the UK. So one good thing, of course, is that it's put the need for improved palliative care right at the forefront. And people are looking at death and dying anew and asking important questions about what it means to die well. One thing we keep coming back to in our discussions in the SCHB is that there seems to be a loss of understanding about the concept of human dignity. So the inherent value of human life was hardly mentioned at all during debates. And when this foundational principle is conceded or ignored or just not explained, you're really left with only the arguments about safeguards. And that, unfortunately, leaves the door wide open for assisted dying to come back again and again with different safeguards. So I, for one, hope that in the future, some of these foundational concepts can maybe be reclaimed or harnessed in a different way. Thank you very much. I will stop sharing.